All right, welcome again. We're so excited to have you. This presentation is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and today's presentation is the 7th Street Challenge, Lincoln's Commute, and it is presented by President Lincoln's Cottage. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a partnership between Internet2, the National Park Service, and the National Archives. This is just a quick disclaimer. By participating in our distance learning session today, you are agreeing to be recorded and streamed and archived as part of our program. We do keep all the recordings of these programs on our YouTube channel so that students and teachers can access them later if they're not able to join us live. All right, we're so excited to have you, and we want you to be able to participate as much as possible because it's just so much more fun if everyone can participate. So I'm just going to go over a few opportunities and expectations for participating today. So when you registered, you were able to indicate whether or not you wanted to participate via video. So if you did indicate that, I promoted you so that you can use your video. If I haven't promoted you and you want to interact via video, just drop something in the chat and I'll work on promoting you once I'm done with introductions here. There'll also be opportunities, even if you're not on video, to participate with your voice. So I will indicate when you can answer via audio, and you can use the little raise hand icon, which looks like a little yellow hand, and I'll tell you over the microphone that I'm unmuting you and that you can answer. And then of course there's the chat box. We'll use that a lot, so feel free to use the chat box to ask and answer questions. All that said, we want you to participate as much as possible, but please also remember to be respectful of these interactive tools. We want to stay focused on the presentation today and make sure that questions and answers are directly related to what we're talking about. That'll help us stay focused and make sure we get to everybody. All right, just one last thanks. For more information about our program and future programs, you can check out our website, internet2.edu/ppsp. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and go ahead and hand it over to our presenter.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joan. I work at President Lincoln's Cottage, which is a historic house and museum in Washington, D.C., where Abraham Lincoln lived for 3 summers while he was the president. We're going to be talking a lot today about his journeys through Washington, D.C. and the people he met along the way. But I'm curious, before we get started, if you guys can tell me something you already know about Abraham Lincoln. And you can raise hand like Therese was talking about, or you can drop your answer in the chat. Just something, anything you already know about Abraham Lincoln. He was the 16th president. He was the tallest president. These are great answers coming in. He's still the tallest person ever to be president of the United States, which is, he's still the record holder, as it were. Great question, Galileo. He was 6'4". Yeah, Pranav, great answer. His mother died when he was a young child. Anybody have any ideas about what was going on while he was president? Yes, I see Birchwood is dropping in that Lincoln helped work on ending slavery in the United States. Right, because he was president during the Civil War, which was a conflict in the United States over whether or not the country was going to continue to have slavery. There were a bunch of states that left and said, we'd like to start our own country. And then the states that were remaining said, we don't know if you can leave. And also, we don't really know whether we want to keep slavery or not. Tinmouth, great answer as well. He did have 4 children. They were all boys, and only one of them survived to adulthood. So while he was president, during the Civil War, Lincoln was living in Washington, D.C., but for 3 summers, he was not living at the White House. He was living at the Cottage instead, and he was going to work at the White House every day. So this is usually called a commute. If you guys have a commute in your life, maybe there's somewhere you go regularly, maybe to school, maybe not to school, maybe to soccer practice or to church or any other kind of place that you go regularly during your life. That's called a commute. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be tracing Lincoln's commute through Washington during the Civil War. We're going to learn about the things and the people and the places that he saw along the way. And that whole time, I'm going to be asking you all to a series of challenges related to what we're learning about, where I want you to bring me something from wherever you are that's related to what we're talking about. So as an example, if you looked around you right now, could you bring me something red? Yes, I'm seeing some answers come up. That's great, right? That's just an example. We don't need to rush on that one, but I will give you some other options for things you can bring me that are going to be related to what we're talking about, and those will all come together at the end. Galileo has some red hats. All right, great. I see, Pranav, you have red sunglasses happening. Great, great, great. This is so good. Okay, so let's get started with President Lincoln. This is a historic map of Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. So you can see I've marked the White House with this yellow star shape here at the bottom, and the Cottage is this yellow house shape up here at the top. You can see the grid of streets of Washington, D.C., and this sort of part up top that's like a little more speckly represents kind of a little bit more of a countryside environment. The city was not as crowded as it is today. There were definitely parts of the city that were, we would probably talk about them as like a country estate or a farm or something like that. And that's these speckledy parts up here. So Lincoln would be finishing his day of work at the White House. This is what the White House looked like during the 1860s. These are some historic images of the house. You can see the building looks pretty much the same as it does now. But one major difference that I noticed, especially in the smaller picture over to the left, is that those people have just kind of walked right up to the front door, which is no longer possible today. During the 1860s, the White House was open to the public. So anybody who had a question for the president or wanted a job in the government could come and line up at the White House and wait to see Lincoln and ask. I don't know if you have a question that you would like to ask the president, but it's a little more difficult to get in touch with the president today. So that meant that the White House and downtown DC was kind of crowded and busy, right? There was a lot happening. Not to mention, the environment around the White House was different than it is today in a couple of big ways. This is a photo that was taken from the top of the Capitol, looking out over the mall in Washington, D.C. So you can just barely see the Washington Monument here in the distance. And this big building here in the middle is the Smithsonian Castle, which is also still there. But what I want you guys to focus on is this big stripe through the middle. This stripe was a canal, it was a body of water that ran straight through the middle of Washington, D.C., except it was not in use anymore, which meant the water was just kind of sitting there. So you can imagine what it's like when water sits there, especially in the summer. It was getting grosser and grosser and grosser. There were, maybe it's dirt and leaves and dead animals and sewage all kind of sitting in the canal. And the White House is just off the edge of this picture to the right. So this was all very close to where Lincoln was living and working. And the city looks really unfinished to me. Right? There's still a lot happening. It's still very much an industrial setup a little bit. And then during the Civil War, there were troops and military equipment staging all up and down the mall. And as you can see in this picture, if you look at this, sort of the bottom half of this picture, you can see the canal again. And you can also see that the streets were not paved. So that meant they were covered in mud. And as more and more people came and walked on them and moved around, they also got grosser and grosser and grosser. I don't know if any of you all have been to Washington, D.C. during the summer. Has anybody done that? Maybe not. But I can report from the front lines, as it were, that, okay, we have a couple of yeses. Yeah, Pranav, good spotted. This is the Capitol building. We'll come back to the Capitol building later. Maybe Akshita can confirm that it is hot in Washington, D.C. during the summer. It is sticky, it is humid, and Lincoln and his family would have been walking around, in a suit during this weather and navigating a Washington, D.C. summer without air conditioning. So that's just a sense of like, what was the physical environment like around Lincoln in D.C. during the Civil War? It was pretty sticky and gross and probably smelled terrible. So in honor of all of that, here comes your first challenge. I'm going to give you 1 minute to bring me something from wherever you are, your house, your school, wherever you're at, that is wet. Go. You have 1 minute. I want you to track down something that is wet. It does not have to be sticky like the humidity in Washington, D.C. Wet is okay by itself. You still have 30 seconds. Great work, everybody. If you're back already, please do drop your answer into the chat. I'm curious to see what you've come up with. And we'll talk about our answers, but you do still have like a full 15 more seconds to find something amazing that is wet. Ready? Here we go. And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All righty. So I would love to hear from like at least one panelist, Therese, about what they brought back, and also some folks in the chat. If you would like to share your answer with your voice, please raise your hand and Therese can help me call on you.
All right, Klaus, go ahead and answer.
I think a good wet thing would be to have is a rain barrel.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Nice. Okay. Anybody else want to share their answer about what they brought back that's wet?
Go ahead, Pranav.
I brought back a pillow that was wet for some reason. I accidentally spilled water on it earlier.
Yeah, so Pranav is bringing to light one interesting thing about this question is that it's pretty easy to make something wet if it wasn't wet already, right? Good work. Okay, I also saw somebody in the chat put snow, which is very exciting and a fun answer there. A lot of water bottles. Yeah, I got one of those nearby as well. So great work, everyone. Is there anybody else who wants to share their answer before we move on? All right, great. So we're going to keep rolling. We're going to continue following Lincoln on his journey kind of northeast through Washington, D.C., trying to get home. And here, so he's left the White House. He's traveling northeast through the city. And here at about this spot, he would pass by Walt Whitman's house. You may have heard of Walt Whitman before. He's a famous poet who was living in Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. That's him on the right-hand side with kind of the Santa Claus beard situation. And he had written some really famous poems, but he had come to D.C. during the war because he couldn't find his brother. His brother had signed up to be a soldier during the Civil War, and then the family hadn't heard from him for a really long time. So Whitman and the rest of his family were pretty worried about him, and Whitman came to DC to work in the hospitals to see if he could find his brother in one of those hospitals. They were kind of worried, like, maybe he's been hurt and he can't find us and he can't write to us. I'm going to go see where he might be. So Whitman was volunteering in the hospitals in Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. The picture on the left is a picture of one of the insides of those hospitals. If you've been in a hospital today, you can make some compare and contrast between what that looks like. A couple things I want to point out are the mosquito nets, which are these white sort of curtainy things over top of all the soldiers, which were there to try and keep them from getting bitten by mosquitoes and getting any of the diseases that mosquitoes spread, like malaria, for instance. And also you can see that the hospital has gas lighting as opposed to electricity, which we didn't quite know how to use during the Civil War. This is a picture of the outside of one of the hospitals in DC during the Civil War. This one was actually really close, well, relatively close to the Cottage. It was called Hairwood Hospital. And you can see there's this row of buildings with black roofs. And those buildings are the buildings that were constructed specifically for the hospital. And then there's this row of buildings on the right-hand side that have white roofs. And those are tents that were constructed because the hospital ran out of space. If you've ever gone to a school that had some classrooms in trailers, it's kind of like that, right? They needed additional space because they didn't have enough space in their buildings. And that gives you a sense of how many folks were being wounded or injured in the war. Because this hospital and a couple of others were pretty close to the cottage, Mrs. Lincoln, just like Whitman, was going and volunteering to help visit the soldiers. She would bring them fruit. She would write letters home for the soldiers who couldn't do it for themselves. That's her over there in the flowery dress on the left. And then her husband, Abraham Lincoln, would run into the wounded soldiers while he was commuting, because he would be riding home to the cottage and the soldiers would be riding in the ambulance up to where the hospitals were. So the picture on the right-hand side is of an ambulance during the Civil War. To me, it does not look very comfortable or fast, but the soldiers who were using it appreciated what people were trying to do their best to help them survive their injuries, right? So inspired by Mrs. Lincoln and Whitman and all of the other people who were working to try and save lives in Washington, D.C., I want you to bring something back to me. Here comes your second challenge. I want you to bring me something you could use to help someone else. Go. And it doesn't have to be that you would help them with a medical situation. It can be anything you would use to help someone else. Though I do see we have some first aid kits coming back, which is awesome. Very good to have those close by. You have about 20 more seconds to bring something that you could use to help someone else. Awesome. I see a lot of Band-Aids coming in. Great. Everyone is so well equipped. This is very good. All right, and here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great work, everybody. I'm seeing some fantastic answers come through into the chat. Does anybody want to talk about their answer? Yeah, Birchwood, I'm especially interested in your answer about that says cell phone calculator vice grips. Can you tell me more about that answer?
Go ahead, Sid. I brought my cell phone for mental health support stuff for friends.
I got the calculator because it can help you with math problems.
Yeah.
Everyone needs a vice grip.
You said everyone needs a vice grip? Amazing. I really like that you all, even among the three of you, have three different ways of helping people. I really appreciate that variety. That's a really great set of answers. Would anyone else like to talk about what they brought back to help someone else? You can raise your hand.
Go ahead, Klaus.
I brought a dog since dogs can help blind people walk and tell them where objects are.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. If you have a service dog that is trained to help somebody out, I think a lot of people find dogs helpful if they are, even just feeling a little bit lonely as well, right? And then as I said, we have a lot of folks with well-equipped first aid kits in the chat, which is amazing and so good. All right, let's keep rolling. We're going to keep going with Lincoln as he goes through the city. He would be passing Walt Whitman's house, and then right here, kind of on the edge of the grid city streets part of the city, he would encounter a contraband camp. So contraband is kind of a complicated word, and it was even more complicated during the Civil War. Can you all tell me what contraband means, what you already know about what contraband means? Okay, supplies is definitely part of it. It's definitely like stuff that you need, or yeah. Klaus has added this dimension that it might be like, yeah, and Galileo as well, that it might be sort of illegal or like something you're not supposed to have, right? So during the Civil War, this got, like I said, even more complicated. During a war, contraband is like if I'm an army and the other army has like you were saying, food, guns, ammo, whatever, something that I need or want, and I go and get it and I take it away and I have it with me now, that stuff is contraband. But during the Civil War, that word was used to talk about people as well. It was used to describe people who had escaped slavery and they were living in this camp here on the edge of the city, kind of like a refugee camp is a good way of thinking about it, because they had stolen themselves away from slavery. And then the Union Army, in order to avoid having to send them back to the people who had been enslaving them, the Union Army was saying, actually, we get to keep these. They're contraband of war. Because the laws said if someone escaped slavery, everyone else had to help send them back into slavery. And so the Union Army was saying, we don't want to follow that law. We're going to keep these because they're contraband of war. We're going to not send them back. But it's a tricky word, right? Because like ammo and guns and food and whatever can't steal themselves. And these people were stealing themselves out of slavery. They were doing the work to escape. So then they would arrive in Washington, D.C. D.C. had ended slavery in the middle of the war, so people knew that it would be more safe for them to come to Washington, D.C. And they would camp on the outskirts of the city. And Lincoln encountered them because he would be riding home, and we know of at least once where he stopped and sang with a group of folks in the Contraband Camp who were singing hymns at that time. So the picture on the left here is a picture of a contraband camp in Washington, D.C. It's probably not the one that Lincoln stopped at, but the picture on the right is a picture of a contraband camp in Virginia, but I included it because it includes people using hymnals, so kind of related to the story of what Lincoln was doing when he encountered the contrabands. This picture is also from Virginia, kind of giving you all a sense of the conditions in the contraband camp. Like I said, they were mostly, we would probably call them refugee camps today. So they were just made of whatever people had, which wasn't necessarily very much. As you can see, these people were escaping slavery and they have a horse and an ox and a donkey, as opposed to a matched set of animals to draw their wagon with, right? So coming up here is your next challenge. Inspired by the contrabands, I want you to bring me something that makes noise. Go. Myra's like, immediately, I know what it is. My cat. Okay, you have 20 seconds. What is something that makes noise? And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. Amazing. So I'm particularly interested for this sharing session in things that make, if you think your thing makes like the most interesting noise, I would love for you to demonstrate that noise for us. So if you can click raise hand, Therese will help me call on folks who are ready to demonstrate their most interesting noise.
Go ahead, Klaus.
I have a flute recorder.
What does it sound like?
I don't know how to play it, but
Okay. It doesn't have to make music. It can make any kind of noise.
okay.
Yeah. Great. I think I also saw a hand from
Birchwood. Yeah, Birchwood, go ahead.
And Galileo as well. Okay, Birchwood, go ahead.
I got a ukulele. And
Yes.
soundboard.
That was great. I'm impressed. Well done, Birchwood. Okay. I think Galileo wanted to participate, but they didn't have their raise hand, Therese.
Galileo, go ahead. If you're making noise, Galileo, we can't hear you. All right. Pranav?
I don't know if this is interesting, but click this pen.
Oh, a classic noisemaker. Well done. Well done.
Also, Galileo, your hand button, raise hand, is in your participants list.
Thanks, Pranav. It looks like we have one more participant. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
let's do one more. That's good.
Rosalani, I'm gonna unmute you. Go ahead. We see it.
But this is a melodica. Basically, you blow and press the keyboard or keys. It goes from high to low, well, low to high. But anyways,
Can you play it just a little bit for us? Like just maybe one or two notes? This is
Very
so
cool.
great, everybody. This is
Thank
like
you.
the most harmonious set of noises. I really enjoyed it. Well done, all. So as Lincoln would be continuing past the Contraband Camp, he would be heading northeast again through this sort of countryside part of the city, and he would arrive at last at home at the end of the day to the cottage, which is on the top of the hill up there. This is what the cottage looked like in the 1860s. This picture is actually from the Lincoln family photo album that Mrs. Lincoln saved this picture of the cottage because she wanted to remember this place. And this is what it looks like today. I've kind of shown you them side by side. So as you can see, we did a bunch of work on the museum to make it look just like it did back then, so that people can come and experience it. And the cottage was a contrast with downtown, right? We talked about sort of wet, sticky, gross, hot downtown, and all these windows on the back side of the cottage, they all open all the way up so that the breeze can come straight through the house. It was much cooler and more comfortable. It was at least a little bit quieter up at the cottage, though not entirely silent, because there were still soldiers camped on the grounds around the family to guard them, but more of a place for focus and for thinking than downtown. And while he was living at the cottage, Lincoln came up with one of his biggest ideas for working on ending slavery, which is the Emancipation Proclamation. You may already know something about it, but the Emancipation Proclamation helped free over 4 million people by declaring that people who were enslaved in Confederate territory were free on January 1st of 1863. So Lincoln came up with that idea at the cottage in the room that I am showing you a picture of. He was using it as his bedroom. And this desk here in the middle is our copy of the original desk, which is still today in the White House itself. And looking out over these, from these windows, Lincoln would have been able to see the city and the Capitol building, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. But as you can see, it's kind of spacious and full of light there. And it really made a difference for Lincoln in terms of giving him space and time to think about this big, complicated problem that he was responsible for doing something about because he was the president. It had become his problem to solve, and he came up with part of the answer while he was living at the cottage. So I want you to think for a moment about where you go when you have something complicated to think about. And then I'm going to ask you for your next challenge to bring me something that helps you focus. Ready? Go. Cool. I'm seeing some answers coming in. You do still have about 15 seconds to bring me something that helps you focus. Here we go. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. All right. Galileo, would you like to try again to share about your answer? I'm really curious about these places that you go that help you focus.
I
Okay.
see that you're unmuted, Galileo, but we still can't. Oh,
Yeah.
there you go.
Okay, I had the wrong microphone on. I'm sorry.
No worries. Go ahead.
So there are a couple of different students. So who said their pantry? Finley? Okay, why? So we said pantry because they like to eat while they're thinking. Okay, Andrew, kitchen table? For any specific reason? Okay, so when he gets home, he sits down at his kitchen table and that's where he just does his work and that's his thinking spot.
Yeah, I saw that a couple of you like to go outside to think, which I think is something you all have in common with Abraham Lincoln. That's something he and his family really appreciated about the cottage, was that it was sort of closer to nature than the White House downtown.
A lot of hands that just raised for going outside.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's something that a lot of people value, right? Is a kind of maybe being able to go for a walk, being able to go and be somewhere where there's fresh air. That can be important to a lot of people when they're looking for a place to think. I also saw some folks talking about music helping them focus. I find that totally interesting because some people can't focus unless it's super quiet, and some people can't focus unless there's like some sounds happening. It kind of works both ways, right? So different things work for different people, but the cottage was really working for Lincoln on this front. And as he was there at the cottage, again, standing on that back porch, looking out the windows of his bedroom, he would have had a vista of the Capitol and of Washington, D.C. So I've marked it here on the map with these circles here at the bottom corner. But the Capitol building, as Pranav was mentioning to us earlier, was not finished during the Civil War. We are back to look at this picture, which, as you can see, is from September of 1860. And before, we were looking at the canal and the muddy streets and all that kind of stuff. But now I want to look at the Capitol building behind it, where you can see that the dome was incomplete. And a lot of people during the Civil War were like, well, we should just sort of stop spending money on the Capitol because we have to spend money on the war. There's too much to do in terms of soldiers and personnel and materials that we need. We have to stop spending money on this. And Lincoln insisted that construction on the Capitol continue. He wasn't the only person saying so, but it was important to him because he saw the Capitol as a symbol of the government and of democracy and of the country itself. And he thought it was important that people believe that this was going to continue, even during a national crisis like the Civil War, when it seemed like the country might just fall apart at the seams. It was important to Lincoln that there be evidence that we were going to make it through to the end, that there was going to be a future for the democracy. So it was not the only building in DC that was incomplete during the Civil War. This is a bit of a closer up picture of the Washington Monument during the Civil War. You can see it was only about a third of the way completed. So there's a third in the Civil War and then about 2/3 later. And today, if you visit the Washington Monument in person, you can still see the line because they use two slightly different kinds of stone. And so you can see where as far as they got during the Civil War. And this picture you can also see talks about some of what I was saying earlier about the soldiers just kind of being everywhere downtown, right? These guys were camped on the grounds around the Washington Monument. The Capitol building, however, did continue to get constructed. As you can see, it gets a little bigger. And here it is in the end of 1864, very nearly finished. And so I think I really like Lincoln's approach of thinking of it as a symbol of something that needed to thinking of the building as a symbol for something bigger, right? So here comes your final challenge for today, though it's not the final question I will ask you. Here, I would like you to bring me something inspired by all these buildings in DC that were not quite done, something you could break into fractions. Go. And to be clear, this is not something like a glass vase that you could shatter and never put back together again, right? Something that comes in a bunch of pieces. Something you could break into fractions. Yeah, I see some folks talking about Legos, which is a fantastic answer. That's kind of the whole point of Legos, is that you put things together that put the small things together into new things, right? All right, here we're coming up on 10 seconds, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Excellent. So, Barbara, would you be willing to talk about your answer about puzzles? So, and if you have a different answer than puzzles and want to share your answer, please go ahead and raise your hand. Oh, sorry about your mic, Barbara, but I do like the answer about puzzles because one of my favorite things about them is watching them come together into a bigger picture as you continue to work on them. Yeah. Anybody else want to talk about their answer for what they brought that breaks into fractions?
Pranav, go ahead.
So quick thing, I have this Lego thing I made. It's a mock I made it by myself. It's my exploration station. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Klaus, go ahead.
I bought a puzzle. Well, this is just a 30-piece puzzle. I have like 500 pieces puzzle. I like putting together puzzles because it can entertain me.
Yeah. Nice. I also saw Akshita's answer about dough as something you could break apart and put back together again, which I think is a really interesting answer, because that's like 2 transformations for dough, right? You take it apart, you put it back together again, and then also you have to usually cook it in some way in order to turn it into its final version. Amazing. Okay, so that's Lincoln has arrived at home at the cottage. We talked about some of the thinking he was doing, and he was really working on solving a big problem that he saw in his community. So I'd love to hear from you all. Who in your community, or who do you see in your community that needs help? What is a problem in the world that you care about solving? And you can type your answer into the chat, or you can raise your hand and tell us about it, either way. What is a problem in the world that you care about solving? Or who, you can start from either place. What's the problem, or who do you see that needs help? Yeah, I'm seeing some great answers about deforestation and helping the folks in your community who might be older or who don't have homes, or the whole COVID situation, which many people need many different kinds of help with. So that's a great answer. And these are like big, complicated problems, right? It's, it's not a problem we can solve one person at a time. Like that one person can completely solve by themselves is what I'm trying to say. But like maybe that feels a little overwhelming, right? Like what am I going to do about saving democracy or deforestation or any of these problems, right? So for me, it's helpful to think of Lincoln as an example. So I want you to put in front of you like all the things that you brought back kind of in the order that you brought them back in. Or if you have them, if you know what they are, that's okay too. But for me, it's helpful to have them like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because when you run into a big, messy, wet, complicated problem in your community, you can look around, see what you can find that would do something to help. You can use your voice to make some noise about the problem and tell people what it is. And that can help do what you need to do to get you focused and bring the different pieces of your community together to work on solving the problem. And that's kind of what Lincoln was doing as he was riding back and forth from the White House to the cottage. He was using that half an hour on his horse to think about what the problem was, to ask other people what they thought about the problem, and to integrate their perspective with his perspective in order to come up with a solution. And the proclamation, again, was not a perfect solution. It didn't free everybody from slavery, and it didn't have any answers at all as to what people were supposed to do after they became free. And it helped millions of people have a foundation on which they could continue to build better lives for themselves. Living here in Washington, D.C. sort of helped Lincoln figure that out. So I'm really impressed with all of the problem-solving skills you all have demonstrated already, even if they were very small problems, like how can I find a wet object that's near me? And so I look forward to seeing you implement your problem-solving skills on the big problems that you care about. And I look forward to seeing the positive change that comes out of those. So thank you for working with me so far today. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about Lincoln or his commute, since I think we still have a couple of minutes.
Maybe while people think about their questions, maybe you could tell us a little bit about Lincoln's Cottage and how long it's been, kind of a monument, and if people can visit, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we opened to the public in 2008 after a restoration effort that started in the early 2000s. So we are a very old place and a kind of a young museum. And as I said, Lincoln spent 3 summers living there, and we are at the moment open to the public, but you do have to visit in a very small group in a specific time slot. But you can go to our website, which is lincolncottage.org, to find out all about how to do that if you or people that you know are going to be in DC sometime soon. Galileo, great question about Lincoln and his parents. So Lincoln was 56 when he was killed. And he was 9 when his mother died. I think that was the 2 pieces of your question there. Yes, also Galileo, yes, Lincoln was the first president to be assassinated. I think sometimes when we think about like, oh, the White House was open to the public, what were they thinking, right? Now, that's easy for us to think about now, but at the time, nobody had killed a president yet. So it was like a different way of thinking about it, right? And also I think there were different expectations in general for how members of the public should have access to the president. Like how much should the president talk to ordinary people was a different set of expectations than we have now. And some of that is kind of security based, honestly, in the wake of what happened to Lincoln. Barbara, a good question. I don't know exactly what made his mom sick. A lot of times with people in history who were sick, including Lincoln's mom and including his son, Willie, who died right before they moved up to the cottage, we can kind of guess what might have made them sick based on what other people wrote down about, like, whether they were throwing up or whether they had a fever or whatever. But because we weren't there and they didn't, there was in the 1860s and even before that, when his mother died, people knew a lot less about what made people sick in general. So it can sometimes be a little hard to tell. But I think, there's no way that didn't have an impact on Lincoln and his life, losing his mother at a young age. Yeah, I see your question as well, Klaus. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have an answer on. I think I have an answer on what happened to Lincoln's mother. I think she died of milk. I think she died of milk sickness from the flea that infected cows' milk when they ate it and would hurt people.
Yeah, that's definitely what I've heard it called as well, as milk sickness. So that might be a starting point for looking it up, Barbara. Thank you, Klaus.
Okay, well, if we have no last questions, I just want to take some time to thank Joan. Thank you so much for sharing your time and all your knowledge with us. And thank you for everybody who joined. It was great to have you and have everyone participate so much. Everybody have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you at future programs.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, wait.